Radio Okitalk, Radio Okitalk, von Mensch zu Mensch.
Welcome to the Wizard of Odd edition 16 with Bryan Lahr. Today, Exorcism and Sex Magic. Welcome.
Oh, good to be here. Really, really good to be here. Yeah, it's been an amazing time. This whole last few months where the world just sort of changed, has become kind of its own its own little epoch. You know, it's its own little time frame. It's like the time stopped when all the big pandemic stuff started, and now it's like this last few months has felt like years in some ways, and days like in others. I'm really super excited about today's topics. You know, exorcism is I was raised. I went to school, Catholic school. And as a little Catholic kid, hearing about demons possessing your body was pretty trippy, and that really freaked me out as a young kid. And when I got out of Catholic school, I kind of walked away from most of that stuff and the dogma of that. But I don't know if you ever saw this movie. I went to see the movie The Exorcist. This happened in the 70s, and I was about 17, 18 at the time. And I remember seeing that movie, and wow, what a trip that was. And so many people at that time just freaked out about that, and there was a huge surge in exorcisms, and people going to the Catholic Church and absolutely certain they were possessed by demons. Most of them probably were, but they were their own demons, not something outside of themselves. And, so that's been a really big topic for me for a long time. As I progress...
Just so I get this right briefly, so you're saying that by the time this movie was released, I don't think I've seen that one, but there's all kinds of bad B-horror movies, I guess, with similar themes. But I understand correctly that then there was a surge in quote unquote actual incidents of this kind of thing.
Well, probably a few real incidents, but I think mainly that movie really scared the hell out of people. And at the time, that was before the level of special effects now, so if you watch that movie, and you owe yourself that movie, that movie was made off of a real event, where this kid in St. Louis, Missouri, was really possessed. And it was one of the very first super documented instances of something people considered to be a real possession. And the movie takes place in, it was written, a book was written called The Exorcist by, I think, William Blatsky, I think, or I got the last name wrong, but the movie The Exorcist was adapted from the novel that he wrote, and he took that real incident and made it into a story. And it was about, they changed it to a young girl who was possessed, and the movie pretty much was the two priests involved, the main priest and his trusty erstwhile assistant coming in and trying to unpossess this girl. And if you watch it now, it's got some really crazy stuff. But one of the things in real exorcisms that pretty much everybody talks about, well, possessions more correctly, is the spirit that has taken over that body, from a Catholic standpoint, it's always a demonic being, and in this case, it was Legion. It was the devil himself, supposedly, that had taken over this kid. They they always think of that as from their ideological perspective. So it's always a demon. They fought with this thing for a long, long time. You really owe yourself to see that one, Raphael, if you haven't. You can get by the fact that the effects look a little yucky. So one of the things that those do, and one of the things that the real incident had, was the demon was telling people in the room super, super private stuff that had never been voiced in the world by any of these people. And it really rocked some of the lay, the non-church people that were in the room, and just blew them away. A couple of them went kind of crazy because they couldn't really deal with it. And then they were the demon was, telling the priests and just pulling things out. Like in the movie, the demon talks about this guy's mother who is in a nursing home, and one of the creepiest scenes, he goes into her voice in the nursing home, going, "Demi, why you do me? Why you do this to me?" And the guy felt really guilty about his mom being in a nursing home, but hadn't ever really voiced that, and just goes into this whole really deep thing that just got all over him deeply and emotionally. And that's one of the kind of running themes that you can tell when it's real, as opposed to a mental disorder, or something that's happening internally with the person. It can a lot of psychologists have gotten involved in that phenomenon, and probably a huge percentage of those cases are actually the own person's mental demons, and schizophrenia and different forms of psychological disorders, that have manifested in that scenario, multiple personality disorder, all kinds of things like that. So not that many cases wind up getting if you're doing it from a Catholic perspective, you have to go through a multi-level process of approval for them to actually get involved and send priests to do that. There's actually a brand, or an order of priests that are specifically exorcists, and which has grown in the last 10 years severalfold. It's kind of a phenomenon that is re-emerging in the last decade or so, and in really kind of intense ways. So, once the application is made and it's documented in multiple visits to the person, then once they finally approve that, then the team shows up and goes to work on that. And that's never really a fast process, at least the Catholic versions of it that I know of. I guess this would be a good time to talk about the different kinds of possession. There are certainly demonic possessions, and spirits that take over the mind and body of a person, and when a person is really super possessed, one of the craziest phenomenons I've seen is the way they get physically bent around in ways that you just can't imagine a body being bent without breaking. And it's really painful and frightening to watch and see those people get distorted, and knowing that they're still in there, but they're so far away and they have absolutely no control of their own physical body, which is just a very, man, what could be worse than that? So, while the demonic thing is certainly well known, there are lots of other, depending, a lot of religions have their own versions of that. The Jewish religion, that phenomenon goes back thousands of years, and they have their own sect of exorcists as well. There are, in the Afro-Cuban scenario, certainly in the Afa scenario, and I'll tell you some of my experiences. I had some really crazy experiences in that. As a matter of fact, doing the exorcisms was something I was rather skilled at. So I kind of became the house exorcist for our group. And
Well, am I not surprised?
and did many of those. And those are really trippy experiences. But those are scenarios where, I guess you could still call them demonic spirits, because they're about parasitic taking over. They actually consume those. But those are from an Afro-Cuban standpoint. And, it's depending on the religious beliefs of the person that's affected. It's always best to approach that process from that perspective, if you're able to do that. And something that you don't hear a whole lot about, and I was really curious to ask you about, because I know this is a subject of interest, and you have a pretty good depth of knowledge about this. But there are also cases of alien possession, and have you run into that in any of your ET investigations?
Yeah, so I guess one thing maybe to mention first, which is just interesting historically, as far as I can understand, even the being that Aleister Crowley claimed to be in contact with actually also was a Grey, right?
Are you talking about Iwas?
Yes, most likely, yes. This one particular entity he channeled. I believe sometime there turned up a description by him, and it basically looks like a small gray alien again.
Yeah, kind of crazy.
Are you familiar with that story?
I am not familiar with that story. Please share.
Okay, I can't actually say too much about this particular one. This is just something that I've read, so this can be looked up. Just again, interesting, because with Crowley, one may rather think of, maybe some whatever kind of, spirits, or like Cthulhu style cosmology. However, of course, I believe even this whole, if I'm saying this correctly now, Babylon working and Moonchild things with, like involvement from Bush family to like JPL, so-called Jet Propulsion Laboratory people, Werner von Braun, all kinds of strange individuals getting together. And it seems there always has been this interesting intersection within these elite realms between the topic interests of, let's say, occultism, magic, and channeling, along with high technology, let's just say, along with alien phenomena. So here, alien and spirits oftentimes seem very much related. And one perspective certainly would be that almost anything that, not almost anything, but a lot of the encounters that would now be attributed to different kinds of ghosts, let's just say, or even angels, many of them could actually be so-called etheric or extraterrestrial entities, just filtered through the cultural construct of the one who's perceiving it. So I cannot tell you now about one particular case where I could say, oh, I know here this individual got possessed by an alien. I would just like to point out that oftentimes what is being called a ghost, a spirit, or even an angel may very well be a so-called etheric or alien consciousness.
It's as you bring up Crowley. He had such an eclectic mix of disciplines. The Enochian system, and one of his main things, and one of the reasons he moved to that place right on the lake. I can't remember the name of that at the moment, but he bought a house and moved there with the express purpose of doing the Bremelin uh, uh, process, and that is like a 6-month long scenario, and the first part of that is contacting and gaining dominion over the demonic realm. The four superior princes and all of the demonic minion that they're over the top of. And then the last part of that was him contacting his guardian angel, and then the four archangels and the angels that kind of are connected to them. So at the end of that scenario, you have dominion over the dark and the light. And one of his most famous statements was invoke often, and we did a whole show on evocation and invocation. And one of my issues on doing invocation, that's the process of actually taking a spirit inside you. And I did that with my angel, when I was working on my angel deck to do the automatic writing. But I kind of had a level of trust of those beings, and my personal angel was with me through that process. So I had at least a measure of reassurance that whatever decided to come in would leave in the end. But Crowley he was taking in the spirits, the spirits of the Goetia, and that whole Key of Solomon conglomerate of spirits, and those are some pretty intense things, and he went into some Eastern disciplines, and he's invoking all of those spirits. And I think that took a toll on him as I read his writing, from his younger days and the first stuff that he started putting out. And I think he had, some wear and tear from that, culminating in the thing that he did with Victor Newberg, where he was calling Choronzon, which is kind of a devil equivalent. And, they had made a magic circle and were in the circle and had manifested that being, and his assistant Victor Newberg happened to kick the circle, the material making the circle, and broke that, and Choronzon came and really just fucked both of them up, and went inside Crowley for a while. And I think that is a benchmark moment in what I've studied about him, in that I think he kind of went downhill after that. I don't think he was ever the same, and it just seemed to kind of further decay, and by the end of his life, he was not in a good place in his life. And I think that particular incident really was a kickoff to that, and invoking spirits into you, in my point of view, is a really kind of dangerous thing, fraught with lots of possibilities for it to go wrong or way differently than you had anticipated. So
maybe just to provide some context, and also, I mean, we don't have to move on already, but it already shows kind of a segue. I mean, we're talking about Crowley, so exorcism and sex magic already related. I'm just gonna read like 2-3 sentences here This is not especially greatly sourced. This is now from ascensionglossary.com. I was just like looking for that reference. So here it says that, talking about Aiwas and gray aliens, many people that are direct abductee experiences have reported differently appearing types of gray aliens in similar appearing bodies of different sizes for over the past 100 years. Aleister Crowley is a key figure incorporating with the, in this context now called, Negative Alien Agenda or Negative Aliens Archon group, starting from gray alien contact made in Cairo, Egypt in April 1904. An Anunnaki in a gray alien body, that's already an interesting idea, named Aiwas, transmitted and implanted him with the Book of the Law, which is the central sacred text of Thelema that was written down from dictation given from the entity. Then it goes on to describe them a bit, but this is the idea about this gray connection on ascensionglossary.com. And then from Wikipedia, just 1-2 sentences in terms of the identity that Crowley ascribes to Aiwas. He says, I was bound to admit that Aiwas had shown a knowledge of the Kabbalah immeasurably superior to my own. And we are forced to conclude that the author of the Book of the Law is an intelligence both alien and superior to myself, yet acquainted with my inmost secrets, and, most important of all, that this intelligence is discarnate. Yeah.
Well, it's funny that you bring up Aiwas, because that was a really huge part of my journey. And I read Crowley's book. That was part of the invoking the Enochian angels, all the way from the 30th level to the highest, number 1, and the Coronzon working was number 9, and the next one was your guardian angel. You can find this whole working in one of his books called the Vision and the Voice, and specifically chapter 8. And Aiwas's, the number that he ascribed to Aiwas was 418, which also happens to be the last 4 digits of my phone number, which I just really have loved, and have kept that number for 20 years because of that exact thing. But his connection with, and he considered Aiwas his guardian angel, and he considered all of the Enochian spirits, which were originally channeled by John Dee and Kelly when they were doing their workings. Kelly was really the channel, and John Dee kind of directed that, and Kelly would use a small scrying sphere made of really super clear quartz crystal, and that's how that whole Enochian alphabet and the whole Enochian angelic system was set up. I've often wondered, I've had some personal experience with those beings, and I'm not sure I would classify them as angelic, at least not angels in the classical way that you think of them being pure and helpful, and
Right.
I think that they were another class of beings, and possibly, I really had never considered that. The alien context to that. But as I sit here and contemplate that now, that really kind of makes perfect sense.
So what's also interesting, I'd just like to read one more paragraph, again straight from Wikipedia, but this seems to be quite well rounded. So here it says, in Magick and in theory and practice, Aiwas is firmly identified by Crowley as the devil, Shaitan, and Lucifer, whose emblem is Baphomet. This assertion is made while Crowley is describing the devil. After explaining that the devil does not exist, he goes on to clarify his statements by explaining that the devil is in reality a label for the god of any people that one dislikes. And this fact has led to so much confusion of thought on the subject that Crowley prefers to let names stand as they are and to proclaim simply that Aiwas, the solar phallic hermetic Lucifer, is his own holy guardian angel, and the devil, Shatan or Hadith, the supreme soul behind Rahor Kuit, the sun, the lord of our particular unit of the starry universe. This serpent, Shatan, is not the enemy of men, but he who made gods of our race, knowing good and evil. He bade, know thyself, and taught initiation. He is the devil of the book of Thoth, and his emblem is Baphomet, the androgyne who is the hieroglyph of arcane perfection. So I'm just reading this because, as you're familiar with Manly Palmer Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, he also puts the whole idea of Satan, Shatan, and the snake in a similar context, not so much as an absolute enemy, but more as the perspective of the tempter that tries to lure man into, let's say, lower desires and the illusion of separation and physicality only. However, also that can be seen as part of the divine plan so that man can recognize who and what he truly is, which of course is not, let's say, merely a beast or a random accident, but a divine spark of the one creator itself.
Well, and the devil card, I'm thinking specifically about the Rider-Waite deck right now. The devil's sitting up on that throne, and he has a male and female slave on chains with large collars around their neck, and one version of the meaning of that is, it relates to addictions and all kinds of the physical world that keeps you captive and keeps you here, but the thing about that scenario is that as you look at the collars that are around the necks of those people, they're huge, and at any moment they could choose to take that off. And I think one of my favorite meanings of that card is that it's about releasing your attachment to and need for the things of the physical world that keep you captive to the physical world, instead of freeing you to continue to elevate and to go past that mindset. So I have a personal experience that I wanted to relate to you from my Ifa days on an exorcism. Well, actually, it comes from my Ifa days, but this was a recent thing that happened about a year and a half ago. I have a very good friend down here in Miami. At the Afro-Cuban thing, whether it's voodoo or Santeria or Ifa, Palo Mayombe, there are a host of, and the Brazilian versions of those. There are a host of those because we have such a huge Hispanic group of people
Yeah,
here.
and just to mention, for some time I actually learned some variants of African dances, along which there also are, let's say, dances associated with voodoo. And it's just really interesting. First of all, there's of course different systems like you mentioned. So in Haiti, then Senegal and all of those, they have different dances and somewhat different deities. And also there is this really, really curious to me mixture of like Christianity and whatever idea of native spirituality. And I think it's just one such great example where you can see that whatever the quote unquote Catholic Church is, how it's just, built from whatever fragments and ideas that already were present in that culture. Because, that system, I guess, is virtually unrecognizable from what a usual Western European or American Christian would consider to be Christianity, right? There is some overlap. Maybe you can explain it better.
Well, the systems of magic that came purely from Africa, Ifa is one of those. don't really make the Christian connection. That happened when people were brought over as slaves from Africa that had practice in those areas, and wherever they ended up in Cuba and Brazil and in the islands, those things bloomed there with their own kind of system, because many of those people weren't really the high level initiate, the witch doctor of the tribe. Those things, a lot of those scenarios got broken up, and whoever was the most senior in that would bring the traditions the way they remembered it, and those would take root and grow there. That's why you have voodoo, which is a whole different scenario. And the Christian connection comes in that they were not allowed to practice those methods by the slave owners, because they were considered demonic and evil. So they connected the Orishas to Christian saints, so that those could kind of go under the wire, and there would be no backlash on that. And that's how that weird synchronicity got.
Right. And this, however, then also seemed to somewhat filter back into, let's say, the more original, I'm now saying native, but let's just say more original concepts and cultures. Is that right? So, because now it appears to me that even on some islands or whatever, which traditionally hadn't been Catholic or something, there now is this strong influence, or even just the naming of some of these deities in some systems, I think, then goes along like saint something or miss something, which would not initially be seen as, an African idea, let's say.
Well, I think most of those are New World phenomenon. If you go, Ifa started in Ile Ife in the Congo in Nigeria, and that Ile Ife is a real place. You can still go there today, and that's where that was birthed. And I haven't seen any infiltration or combination of the Judeo-Christian scenario, saints or anything else in those places, and which was one of the things that attracted me to that, And it's kind of curious the way, like with Santeria, you have which is a lot like Ifa, but that, those combinations with Saint Barbara and all of those connections, really happened in a particular way that bloomed huge in Cuba and kind of came to the States and has filtered into South America, a little bit in Mexico. But then you also have voodoo, which kind of has different names for the Orishas and that they made completely different connections, so that it's a whole different, the saints they connected to that are really different than the saints that were connected to the Orishas in Santeria. So I think a lot of that had to do with where it happened, and now the spread of that, and you get cross-pollination now, because back then, information, it was a lot more difficult for information and cultural things to spread outside of the immediate area that it was in. People had a difficult time traveling, even just sending mail or having any kind of communication like that took weeks and months. So people were a lot less likely to spread outside of their own sphere of experience. But now those things are like all over the world, and there are people practicing Ifa, Canada, everywhere. And I think now that's maybe a little more prevalent, because all of those things are living systems. and there's long traditions to those, but a lot of those traditions, like Ifa, there are not many written, you know, manuals or tomes or instruction things that are written down that, detail exactly how it should work. Most of that stuff was passed down from generation to generation, from, witch doctor to witch doctor to witch doctor to witch doctor, and their students and them going out and spreading that out. So those traditions really became very specific to who was the person that was relaying the information, rather than repeating like with Western magic, you can find writings. People are still doing Agrippa, rituals that he wrote in the 1400s, So,
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective unto itself, whether, there is maybe even you mentioned this, the whole idea of oral tradition, which in that sense just means basically you need to be taught by someone to, in a sense, get a transference of the energy. The other perspective that's interesting is if you have little or no books, again, you need this, let's say, access yourself, and you kind of need to channel the entire complex of information, and really need to be able to embody it if you cannot externalize it, because your tradition just doesn't have that. That's, I guess, an interesting difference. And just to clarify, so the version of these religions I was particularly referring to appears to be Haitian Voodoo. No surprise, because my teacher, for dance in this case, was Haitian. And this is where they also mentioned that there is this particularly strong intermingling between these, let's say, Afro-Cuban religions and Christianity in particular.
I have never practiced voodoo myself, but I've been fortunate to be able to go to some really incredible rituals and get-togethers. And one of the things that really amazes me about that zone is when, depending on which deity they're trying to summon, there's a specific dance. There's a specific drum pattern, which I've just gone crazy over, man. Those are really, really cool. And watching the energy change in that environment, and seeing some of the crowd actually get possessed, man, when their eyes roll up back in their head and all you can see are whites, and they're moving around the room in this very strange, physical position, it's intense, man. And you can see that energy when it enters the space and comes in and swirls around the room. And they call that being a mule. And they actually and they refer to it as being ridden by the spirit. And I don't usually see or I haven't seen a scenario like that where those people, get information or say things, to the crowd. It's that their own personal experience with that, and ending that is always a really big part of that scenario, so that they don't stick around to consume you, because a lot of things that are parasitic aren't necessarily evil in the evil context of their purpose is to destroy you and profane God. They're entities looking to eat, and you become a host, and it's kind of a more parasitic kind of scenario than it is a philosophical scenario. So to that subject, I wanted to just share a recent experience that I did for a friend of a friend, and it's curious. This the guy, when I got into Ifa, I was directing kids commercials and just kind of killing that, and I was doing really well with that. I was making good money, but it bored the hell out of me. I just I just wasn't enjoying it, and all the restrictions of what you could say and what you could do. And it really just became about the money for me. So I was looking around for a subject to do a short film on, um, and have something that I could enter into the upcoming film festivals. And an acquaintance of mine from working on the sets, I knew was a Santera, which is a female version of in Santeria. And I asked her about her religion, and she shared some really crazy stories with me, and a story specifically about the blend of magic called Palomayombe, which we've discussed on a number of times, and her experience with that, and being exorcised by a Polero, and it turned out that the spirits that were possessing her wound up showing up as two small pygmies, and were really intense. And that whole scenario was very, very, very bizarre and kind of changed her life. And right after that, the movie The Believers came on with Martin Sheen. You owe yourself a view of that too. I think you would find that kind of enlightening, because there are a lot of things that it's a movie, but there are a lot of things in that are brought up I haven't seen brought up in any other movie. And it really deals with kind of a Polero that comes from Africa and inserts himself in the New York Santeria scene, and the repercussions of that. Very, very, very intense. So I decided that I wanted to do a film about Palomayombe. I just don't have enough sense for my to know when not to do it, and it was so bizarre and kind of spooky and frightening, and I just decided that was where I was going to go. So I had no idea how to contact any of those people, and I wound up through a friend finding somebody that knew some Poleros, and wound up hooking me up, and then that whole journey began. And I've stayed really good friends with the guy that connected me all these years, and about a year and a half ago, he called me up and he goes, "Dude, I don't ask you this very often, but I have a friend who is like totally possessed." I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay." I'm thinking, well, it's just some kooky person. And he goes, "Would you please, please, please go over and see if there's anything you can do about it?" And I was like, "Well, he's done me so many favors." I went, "Sure, no problem." And I show up to the guy's house, and as I pulled into the driveway, the battery to my car died, and my car died. I went, oh. And as I got towards the house, it just was so heavy and dark, and it was like, wow, this really is real. Went in and saw him. And before I met with him, I wanted to just walk around the house and see what was going on. And there was not just one, but it was like a nest of beings that were just chewing on this guy, man. And I went into his bedroom, and he had this fucked up shag carpeting on his floor, which is like the worst thing you could possibly have on your floor. It's like the negative collector. And I'm looking at the carpet, and I'm like focused in on it, and there were like these weird snaky things that rose up out of the carpet, and were just, they weren't sentient in the way that you would think of like an intelligence, but they were there to eat, and they were just chowing on him every single night when he went to sleep. I was like, oh my God, this is really, really crazy. And as I'm talking to the guy, I'm seeing his eyes, his pupils. I'm like looking at his pupils, and they went from round to like almost square. And I went, wow, this is really, really crazy. And the whites in his eyes darkened up while the color in his iris kind of bloomed. Another effect I've never seen before. And I'm like, wow, man, this is really, really crazy. So, I wasn't prepared to deal with the level of intensity at that moment. So I did a bunch of readings. I did an Opele reading, which is an Ofa reading with a string of Opele shells. And I also did a really deep tarot reading, and then did a physical reach out myself to scope it out. And there was one kind of lead being that had inserted himself in Carlos and was just, he never left. And he backed off enough to let him get through his day and work and keep making money to sustain the place. But as soon as that was over, it seemed like every night it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And I had never really interacted with this guy before, but I'd been to a party at my friend's house where this guy had been, and this 2 or 3 years before that. So the way he looked now, as opposed to then, it looked like he'd aged 30 years. I mean, it was just frightening. I'd never seen it to that extreme. So this entity was just consuming him, and I think at that point it had gotten so bad that they keep you alive for a long time when they're eating you and consuming your energy. And this guy was married, and they had had a very long, really good marriage, and in the last few years they fought every night. They wound up being in a space where they hated each other. It was just really awful. And it was all of the things that were being described to me were just like generators for the kind of low band energy that those entities like to consume for food. So I formulated a plan, and we went over to the house. And the first thing that we did was attack the house itself. So I had him move the furniture out of the living room. I had him tear the carpet out of his bedroom, which he was super resistant to do, which I found very curious. It was like those creatures, those little snaky, weird creatures that were eating him were just working on him like really hard, telling him, no, that was just not the thing. But we finally got him convinced to do that. He took that out. We wound up doing a super scrub and floor wash. Went and sprayed all of the walls. We cleaned out his bedroom, got behind the furniture, and got all the dust and dirt out. Scrubbed and mopped his floor with the cleaning solution we had made, and already just with that, it changed the feel in the house. And then the next thing that I went after was actually dealing with the being that was inside of him. And, his background was, he really strongly believed in Santeria. And so I pulled out, one of my exorcism rituals from my bag of Ifa tricks, and went to work on him, and really just spent hours kind of breaking the crust. There was the being inside of him, but this was kind of, I'd seen versions of this, but this was the most intense one, where there was this multi-layer crust that just completely encircled him. And it was some of his light was getting through it, but it was even compressing his aura. It was so solidified. So the first part of that was attacking that, and that took hours, about 3 or 4 hours to work through that. And once that actually happened, the last part of it was the most intense. We took them out in the backyard, and I had 2 machetes that I put in a fire and superheated until they were just glowing red. And I took those in both hands and went from his head to his feet, like just an inch or so, like so close that the heat from it was intense on him, and just scrape that down and scrape that down. And I don't normally hear loud sounds. Sometimes you get things that sound like the wind or ooh, some sort of low kind of groan or maybe a growl. But this was a shriek, a loud animalistic shriek, and it just kept going and going, and it was really resistant. Reheating the machetes, and there's a specific incantation to be repeating while that's going on. And I'll be honest with you, it was wearing me out, man. It was super, super intense. So finally, on the last couple, the shriek kind of changed to more of a wail than an aggressive kind of like growl. And I knew I'd finally start purchasing some territory. And on the very last one, it was like that. There was a pop, an audible pop. There were 3 other people in the room, and everybody kind of like sucked in their breath because it was so loud. Pop! And this weird wailing wah, that sounded like it was going off in the distance. And we let him just lay there for a minute. I had brought some leaves from my pomarosa tree, which is just like the platinum of exorcism materials. And we did an omiero, which is where you take the leaves and you crush them up with a couple of other ingredients too into some really purified water, and then wash the person's body with those. And then I actually took the leaves and scraped his whole body. And oh man, the lightness, like seeing his aura come back and blooming, was just joyous beyond words, joyous beyond words. And there were these 2 dogs in his neighbor's yard that had been right up at the fence, just barking and barking and barking and barking. And those dogs drove this guy crazy because they did that all the time. And I wound up taking the 2 machetes and sticking them in the ground and pointing them at the fence. And the dogs yelped and ran away, and to this day have never come back over there to bark. I've gone back a couple of times to check it out just to see if it is stuck. And happily, he moved. And last time I saw him, which was about 6 months ago, I was looking at his eyes, and his eyes were back to normal. He looked younger. That usually doesn't happen, man. When they kind of suck the juice out of you and age you, that aging doesn't usually reverse. But in this particular case, he looked younger, and his vitality was back, and it was just really good. His pupils in his eyes remained round, always a good sign. And yeah, so that level of possession is very real and very intense. And that's probably one of my more intense experiences with that level of doing an exorcism specifically. I don't really enjoy that process. I'm really good at it, but I don't really enjoy it. And the other thing that I brought to bear on that with this last version that I did was not just using the implements and the energy and the focus of the incantations and the plants, but I was able to add my own juice to it, which really was the thing that wound up cracking that weird shell that was around him, and just blasting that, blasting that, and blasting that, like you're blasting at a wall of bulletproof glass, you know, and you start making a crack, and you start making a crack, and you start making a bigger crack, until finally that just kind of shattered and went away. But having my own juice to and some measure of ability with that at that point was a great addition to that, and has wound up being a great addition to all of the disciplines I had involved myself with before I started my projective practice. So really kind of a cool experience, haven't thought about for a while, and wow, really intense.
Thank you for sharing. What do you think about doing the music break? We are back.
Wow, great track. I love both the tracks you played today. I'm working on just inches away from my my Wizard of Oz theme song for the show, and it's so much in this vibe, man. It's really, really great. I'm like, I love both of this. One you played first at the beginning of the show, just awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
the first one, just to mention, so this track that just played was by Just B, that's JUSSB, called Sandman in the Our Man remix. This is like, let's say, underground dubstep. And the other one is another one of my most favorite artists by the name of Shango. Haha, big surprise. Written with an S in this case.
That's hysterical, man. That's amazing. Well, a lot of people spell it that way, actually.
Right. The particular track is called Sempre, but he's really amazing. You know, like since many years, got really famous along with Soul Action Radio from California. And what he's doing is he's doing just the best type of, you know, Brazilian break beats, re-chopped up, new style, I don't know, hip hop, something amazing, basically.
Yeah, really a nice combination of all of those, and it was really, really fresh, and I dig the stripped down versions of that, like that track was, where it's just that beat just takes you away. Well, it's kind of like the voodoo beats, you know, the drums by themselves just take you somewhere. Really great. Hey, send me those MP3s, please.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. So, sex magic. This kind of a woman practitioner that I know was I was having lunch with last week, and she brought up the topic and has been doing a lot of experimentation with sex magic herself, and we got in a long discussion about that and where I've gone with that. Certainly we'll talk about Crowley. We'll bring that back up. You know, in the OTO, that's one of their main thrusts is using sex in ritualistic fashion. But my first really kind of exposure to that, and my first attempts at trying to use that myself were I got turned on to that through Austin Osman Spare, and I got deeply into his version of sigil magic, which I have grown. I still, that's part of my integral toolbox, daily toolbox, making sigils and constructs, which we've talked about many times. But one of them, it's cool to make the symbol, but the symbol without energy and fuel isn't going to be very effective in and of itself. So one of his recommendations, because I never got the impression that he was a projective magician himself. I never really read anything that indicated to me that he had projective abilities or went down that path and flow. And so to generate the energy that he needed, he connected launching the sigil with his orgasm. And I found that very intriguing because, you know, certainly that split second of orgasm is such a release of energy, especially if you've practiced, you know, some people call it edging or you know, orgasm denial for hours, where you just get it to that edge and you back off and then do that build again. Man, you build a well of energy that gets released in it's kind of like a nuclear bomb, you know. It's that split second where 1 second everything's normal, and a split second later, man, it's just boom, man. It's a nuclear flash and a blast of energy and heat.
And just to point out, there's even the most, in a sense, you know, basic techniques from the Taoists of the microcosmic orbit, which is also all about channeling and cycling the sexual or just creative energy within one's own body. And there's actually quite a few traditions, it seems, that have even quite simple techniques to facilitate that, even without getting so far as to the idea of orgasm, though that, you know, in many different ways, of course, is related, but even just a general idea of understanding that energy follows attention, that we have all kinds of energy systems in our body, and one of them that maybe is there for everyone or certainly can be activated is this idea of the microcosmic orbit, which, for example, by Mantak Chia in the Tao of Love, and the books by his students, first and foremost, Eric Jude Love. There is a book called Taoist Yoga and Sexual Energy. And also here it's, these things in a sense are explained. So all I just want to say with that is this is not just some interesting ideas in magic books, but many traditions deal with this. And definitely it can also be then, you know, related to consciousness and to all kinds of other areas.
So have you experimented with that yourself?
Certainly. I basically read this book quite some time ago. And, you know, then there's some other more rabbit holes to go down. But definitely, and the one thing I may have mentioned before, at least on a Team Rabbit Hole show, is the whole idea, which I just like to mention, you know, as a type of PSA, you know, public servants announcement, is that usually it's quite well known that women are capable of the idea of multiple orgasms just because of their biology and maybe because of the way the culture is layered currently. For several reasons, men have it, basically are not entrained into that at all, but that there actually is the capacity for men to equally have the idea of multiple or so-called non-ejaculatory orgasms, which are so-called full-body orgasms, basically. And well, all I can say is when I learned about all of this, I was interested enough and synchronicity struck in a way that I was fortunate enough to actually experience this. And all I can say is that probably similar, like when someone is, you know, like really drawing down the juice and having highly intense, you know, magical manifestation experiences or other extreme altered states. But anyhow, all I can say is that the way my body felt in these, let's say, I guess almost a minute or something, I was like, wow, okay, if this is a feeling state that is accessible whilst within this incarnation, then this place actually may make some sense, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, that's true. So, you know, I got deeply into that practice with the sigil stuff, but I found for myself that you know the energy can go off in so many different directions, you know, and I find now that I like a purity of energy, not that's not like purity like good or bad. That's purity of it's a singular focus that's the only thing that energy is attached to. so that when that juice is driving the construct or the sigil or the focused intent, that it's not adding any extra little things from the outside that can send that off into a kind of skewed area. And I found it extremely difficult to maintain a focus on the ritualistic intent as I was in the sexual fire, you know, and my own creative bent, you know, that when I'm in that space, man, I go to some really kind of crazy places, and maintaining the sexual arousal part of it without connecting my mind to sexual situations proved really difficult for me. It wasn't that easy to generate that without thinking about what I was doing and how turned on I was and all of the things that go with a full sexual experience with someone. And and you know, especially if you're by yourself and you're trying to launch a sigil and you're trying to do that energy, you know, just maintaining that level of arousal and energy build without your mind going to, you know, fantasy situations and
Yeah.
other thought
What I'm
projections
wondering
is
about,
really
just
hard.
briefly, as we had this talk also again on a Team Rabbit Hole episode recently, where we just briefly touched upon the idea. I mean, there's a whole lot of things to say about the idea of, you know, a sexual, let's say, liberation in the most positive sense, in terms of removing guilt and shame, understanding, you know, to respect yourself and others and so on, not to violate yourself and others' free will, and then all the levels and connections of consciousness you can get into if your system is aligned enough. This is, you know, like the ritual aspect of it, or the combination aspect, and there's a whole other layer as well. But what we spoke about was the idea, just as you mentioned, like launching a desire, energizing it through orgasm in particular. And then what came to my mind is that I believe at some point I heard a channeling by some kind of Pleiadian, maybe have actually been either, I think her name is Wendy Cassidy or Barbara Marciniak, I'm not exactly sure, but something along the lines, because someone was asking like, yeah, I'm trying these techniques and what do you think? What should I think about when I do this? How should this be done? And what they're kind of saying, which I can also relate to, is like, well, you know, when you're like feeling really good and enjoying yourself, maybe you want to focus on enjoying yourself and don't need to, like, you know, split your consciousness in this way.
Right.
Although I can also see what you're saying in terms of reprogramming oneself, at least to a degree, that you can feel, let's say, this, in a sense, arousal, but this is ultimately only excitement and a representation of a higher energy. And attach that itself, let's say, to the creative process of life itself, and not only, let's say, the quote unquote physical, material, biological sphere, certainly also has, you know, great value, and there is something to get there as well. But I just also want to frame it in the other sense of like, maybe, you know, we don't need to stress out about these things too much. And the other thing I thought about is that why not even set up a ritual in a sense, or an intention where one could be like, okay, I'm setting up this intention sphere, or let's even say energy redirection circle or something. And then I know whatever I'm going to do within that space and time and circle, whatever I'm doing, actually, this shall all be channeled in this particular direction. I'm just making something up now, but just as another idea, let's say, because I assume we can be a lot less dogmatic about many of these things, and it can be a lot more simple maybe than some of the rituals, of course, that have been written down so far. Or what do you think?
I would agree with that. You know, that I've never been an actual member of an OTO group, but I was invited to participate in a ritual with some people that I know really well that are involved in that. And at that particular ritual, there were 8 different people. And the first part of the ritual was set up where there was an intent and something that we were working to accomplish. So that focused intent, and all 8 people were supposed to be completely focused on that intent. And that got made into kind of a little energy construct and ball. And then there were, a multiplicity of sexual acts, and everyone trying to kind of coordinate a simultaneous release to drive that. And man, I found that experience interesting. It was enjoyable. I had a really good time, but the end result wound up getting skewed in some really strange and unexpected ways. Like the original intent, the focused intent that was set up at the beginning did in fact manifest, but it came with a bunch of Klingons that weren't really intended, and
Klingon?
yeah, right. Klingons. Yeah, Worf wasn't there. So, and I also found that in my experiments with the sigil magic and launching things with that, it's like the things I was never able to make myself devoid of thinking about other things. When I'm launching a sigil now, I've gathered the only thing I'm focused on is the intent of the sigil and the shape of the sigil and the energy that I use. My favorite place to go for that is right near the core of the earth, right where the magma and the core kind of join together. And there's this crackly blue electromagnetic juice down there that is pure in just the most magnificent way, man. I am so addicted to that. And I pull that up from the deep down there, bring it up, fill myself up with it, and that is what I use as the fuel to drive the car, which is the sigil. And I found that my experiments with that have been infinitely more successful, and that a much higher percentage of the time the intent actually manifests without any additional little flurries that happen out to the side that you didn't want from that because of their attachment to the energy and then getting interconnected with the sigil. And
what this reminds me of kind of is, it's almost like, although we are holographically everything, as I contend, it can make sense, especially from this conscious level, obviously very much bound to materiality, to construct the idea in a way like you did, to in a sense delegate it to a higher energy, which still is us, but through that idea of a conscious delegation and cooperation, let's say, may greatly stabilize the process. Because obviously if I, let's say, connect or channel through the idea of the energy of the entire earth, whatever that concept may mean exactly, will most likely in total, let's say, have more capacity than just one human body or even a group of humans thinking themselves to be alone. I'm now also thinking about the way that these rituals may be set up conceptually, also in the Crowleyan sense. May be interesting to what extent then individuals believe that it is only themselves creating, if you can see what I'm saying.
It's not really individuals create. I mean, I don't think that the blue juice down at the center of the earth is higher than, I mean, if you've spent hours working up your energy towards an orgasm, that is really intense energy. And that's not just you. I mean, you're drawing from all around you to build that energy. And but that energy is Yeah, there's all kinds of inclusions from that about that your mind has at that point in time.
Exactly,
When
that's what I
and
was thinking about. Yeah,
when you're pulling that juice up from the earth, it's devoid of any other programming. There's no other
exactly. Yeah.
thoughts in that. It's just a batch of juice that is available to do whatever you want with it. And then the intent is the only thing then that has programming, and that winds up being way more successful. It's like that scenario with the OTO, and like there are 8 different people there, man. So it's kind of, imagine all of the stuff going on. I mean,
Right.
who can actually be in a state of sexual arousal but be in blank space where you're totally neutral and devoid of thought? I don't know. Maybe there are people that can do that. Maybe, I've heard some of the yogis are able to do that, but I haven't been able to approach anywhere close to that in my own thing. But, again, everybody is a different mix of set points and a different creature, and, channels and relates to energy in different ways, so that was for me just part of exploring and seeing what worked with my my particular psychotic nature.
Maybe there's one particular idea I'd like to bring up, just to, draw the context again. So I've been talking about the idea of the, so-called multiple orgasms also for men, and also the idea, what I'd like to add, and this is of course just a physicalized representation, but then there is no so-called, how do they say, like refractory period or whatever. And what this is, and one can think about it in a sexual sense and be like, oh, amazing and feels great. And that's all, wonderful. And that's the, let's say, representation of the energy. But the point here actually being that, number one, these states, if one is, let's say, ready or synchronistic, can be achieved completely alone. And at least in my own personal experience, I never felt better. And, there was no one else around at that moment. So that's interesting to note, because of course, much of society also is based on the idea of, really like a negative sense of dominating others, having others do things for you, or changing yourself for others to please or to whatever. And oftentimes, ultimately, let's say, in order to quote unquote get laid, whatever this exactly may mean. So this is just interesting to me that there are tools and techniques where you can completely free yourself of that and achieve pretty much, the highest extremely high states of ecstasy. And then the other idea is, of course, that if both individuals who are choosing, to consciously and positively conjoin are aware of these levels and are interested in building that capacity, and what you can actually create, and this is where just, life starts to make sense to me, even with the traditional idea of, man and woman. If both have the capacity and both are aware that they can cycle the energy within themselves, probably for women, there's also some particular aspects to this. For men, it's really like also learning some kind of a, let's say, physical, psychological, biological skill. But then imagine such a relationship or such an interaction where then none of both entities ever get depleted through the interaction. As long as they remain on that level, there could even be, more and more ecstasy plateaus and de facto these highest states achieved without any need for recuperation and without any loss of energy, even represented physically in that sense. So the energy just keeps cycling within the individuals and keeps getting amplified between the individuals. And that's where from what I can grok, I would say that any idea, if it ever existed, of an actual high priesthood that knew about these things, I'm pretty sure that's how they were doing this.
That's a really good point. There are a couple of issues with the sexual thing, though. You look at it. We're in physical bodies that genetically are, manifestations of two paths. They're genetic women who have, physical differences, and certainly our physical differences, but energetically, we're a mix of both of those energies inside. And I think that's another element of it that you can bring to bear on it, where you're channeling your feminine and your masculine at the same time. And I find that mix is really very, very intense, and winds up being devoid of some of the, I don't know about you, but the, like, your subconscious boils up through the second process, the sexual process a lot, and sometimes things that you want to think about, are there. And I find this for myself. I don't know where you are on this, but it's like things that turn you on and excite you and are not necessarily things that were picked by me. I mean, I can look back to my childhood way before I even understood the concept of sex, and there were things that excited me. I had no idea why, but there were things that excited me. And I don't know, I haven't been able to exert control over those things. They were kind of like, they seemed to be part of my makeup, and it's very difficult for me in a ritualistic mode to divorce myself of those. Have you had any experience with that?
Well, we just had a discussion about, whether or not we're spiritual beings, understood by the idea of, we just had this talk yesterday, actually, the idea of what would have happened if I would have grown up with different parents in a different environment. And then at least one individual came to the conclusion and said, well, I'm pretty sure even as a child, this realization that if I had different parents, still I would be similar in terms of my personality. So what I would assume is that there is a combination of some set points or energies, which then can get culturally expressed very differently depending on, in what context you're born. There is probably also some idea of imprinting in terms of early experiences, although also here then it could be argued, why is someone having those experiences first? Is it because of their setup and so on? So, who knows what originates what? And just in practical terms, I would assume that if there is an aspect which is particularly tricky, maybe it can be done in a different way. Maybe things don't need to be separated in that particular sense. Yeah.
Have you? I think you've probably experimented with this, but combining your male and female energy into one focused, kind of like a third. It's like your man, your woman, and then the combination of those creates something, a third thing.
The joke is, of course, as you mentioned, there is, if you will, outwardly different expressions of male and female as humans biologically. However, of course, we all contain all energies, and we must, because any system that would only exclusively have negative or positive energy would not be able to, have a somewhat homeostatic experience or something along those lines. So that only makes perfect sense. And I would say that this idea, and whether one talks about it in a sexual context or in a spiritual context, in terms of consciousness or metaphysics or biology, brain hemispheres, this is what it is all about always, is the combination and this alchemical process, of calcination, dissolution, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, a distillation of the male and female energy within oneself, just as we are, walking toroids, and the energy is always spinning, and we always have two brain hemispheres, and it's all the magic and all the ecstasy and joy and so on always seems to occur when the brain hemispheres are synchronized. That's when clarity, intuition, and all of those come in. And I'm pretty certain that that's also the reflected state of these highly, ecstatic and orgasmic states just as well.
Franz Barden, my one of my main inspirations. You know, in his book, Initiation into Hermetics, you know, his first the first page of that book is his own tarot card that he did of the Magus card. And you know, he went really deeply into the whole he calls the magnetic fluids of both of those things, and the combination of those things, you know. And even Baphomet, you know, he's an androgen, he's both, you know. So interesting subject to play with and see where it goes. And it can be really pleasurable too, although it can really suck really bad when if you're trying to send something out and it goes askew, you know, or it manifests the way you want it to, but it brings some other unintended consequences that you didn't really want, you know.
I guess what's good, just as a general view, and this is something that cannot really be communicated, but what I was kind of getting at earlier, this idea of, you know, creating and recreating energy and reinforcing energy through congruence, through synchronicity, through resonance, and that this can put you, and this again can be done individually through techniques or with partners, can put you in this like positive feedback loop. And of course, then you can still choose otherwise, but you can always access some layer of, you know, like turning up your microcosmic orbit, basically. And what this can then do, and I guess greatly help any and all relationships, is just realize that you can, even on a simple, you know, level of a slight mood improvement, yeah, you can meditate for a moment, you can focus on your energy, cycle your energy, and you can feel better. And you're not reliant upon anyone or anything upon that, except your own attention, and maybe taking a few deep breaths and focusing your energy just a tiny bit. And why I'm pointing this out is because we are generally taught that, you know, everything is scarce. You need to seek for resources and everything, basically, and others should make you happy. But these can be really simple techniques where you can feel on a mood level, and also in a sense on a somewhat idea of an arousal level, which are always somehow connected. You can basically have this independent cycle, which you can train whenever you like, which you can expand however you wish, use whenever you wish or don't wish to, but you have the option. And this is also for me kind of like a small level proof in the first stages that we are completely independent energetically, that anyhow the outer world is only in a reflection, and that of course could also on a practical level, I guess, greatly improve many relationships if individuals more and more realize that it is themselves that are responsible for their own joy, and then basically, you know, select their partners or whatever.
Hallelujah.
You know, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Rather than, you know, trying to fix something through the outside or look for some puzzle piece to make them happy, but usually right from the start, you know, both can tell that it's a foul compromise or something. So just to point out this difference in perspective. And there are, of course, tools and techniques and milestones, if you will, to be achieved. But the basic understanding and the most basic idea can be practiced by anyone. And it's just a perspective. And I think that in itself could greatly shift, you know, human relationships from a scarcity and domination and control perspective, really to the idea of unconditional love towards oneself and another.
You know, when I was young, and my dad was sharing really amazing gems of truth. You know, one of his main ones to me was, you know, happiness is not an external thing; it's a choice, not a condition. And if you're waiting for things to happen to you that make you happy, if you think that you're going to be able to find else that's going to make you happy, I think that's a really fruitless journey and a fruitless road. And I think when you get to the point that exactly what you were saying, that, you know, you're responsible for your own happiness. You know, I had a teacher early on that had a film, an old grainy black and white film of the Chinese invading a Tibetan monastery, and there were soldiers shooting people up. They were burning the temple, and there was a circle of monks sitting outside of the temple meditating. And while all of this chaos was going on around them, this horrific scene in so many levels, and seeing their beloved temple being burned to the ground, they're still sitting there with these peaceful smiles on their face as they're meditating. And that, man, I use that image to remind myself of what's real so often. And when you find yourself in that space where you're able to generate your own happiness and peace inside, regardless of what's going on. I mean, look at the world right now, man. It is crazy town, you know.
Yeah, best time to learn about all of these,
wow,
internal
right.
ideas, right?
Yeah, so when you can generate that, you start emanating a happiness that's of a different level. And, the law of magnetism, you wind up, if you're looking for someone else to make you happy, that's not going to happen. But if you make yourself happy and project that out, then you wind up just intrinsically connecting with another soul or several souls that have that same point of view and are emanating that same happiness. And just by the law of frequency attraction, you wind up connecting to people that are whole in and of themselves, and no one is looking to the other one to provide happiness, or everybody's providing for themselves. The mix gets together. It's this symbiotic relationship rather than a dominant submission relationship. If one person is looking to someone else, and their happiness and joy is depending on how someone else acts, I mean, that's fraught with disaster. That can't really work. And and one or the other person in that relationship winds up being the dominant scenario, which that can't last. That's not a fertile ground to let the seeds of a relationship grow. When both people are coming to the party secure in their own joy, then that's the kind of ground that a really great tree can grow from, a lasting tree too, and that's kind of the mindset from which I've been operating for a long time. When my dad told me that, of course I blew him off. No, Dad, that can't be true. Oh man. So now I wound up thanking him, way after the fact. His gems become brighter and more truthful to me the older I get. And man, I just so at times have entertained the fantasy of what would life have been like had I gone back and actually listened to him and actually put into practice some of the.
Oh, you did.
The great. Well, yeah, but
you are.
It took me a long time to get there, my brother. What he was telling me when I was 18, it's like, man, I'm in my 60s now. It's like, wow, I'm just getting it. What a slow learner. But happy that I got it eventually. Anyway, man, they're really amazing little truths. So pretty cool little discussion today, man.
All I can think about is, even if it takes 30, 40, 50, however many years, in the eyes of God or in the mind of God, it's just a blink of an eye. And who knows how often we've been around the block in all kinds of different ways already. So yeah, all I'm thinking is, generally speaking, things are looking good. To everyone listening, of course, thank you very much for listening and allowing yourself the neutrality also to investigate these ideas. As always, everyone shall make up their own mind. I just think that so oftentimes, especially these ideas that are so emotionally charged with, either positive and especially negative ideas, it's always worthwhile investigating it neutrally. And I believe even as the Bible says or whatever, check and verify everything and take what is best for yourself and judge the tree by its fruits, I would say.
Build your own cosmology and let that be the guiding light in your life rather than the dogma of a cosmology that someone else or a group of other people have built.
Precisely, so it is. Yeah, so thank you very much, Bryan.
My pleasure as always. It's always an intellectual orgasm getting to talk about this. And I would, man, if anyone out there has been spurred to try any of this, I would so love to hear some feedback on your results and what you think about it. So open invitation at any time.
All right, so happiness is a choice, not a condition. Thank you all for listening and catch you all next time. Enjoy yourselves.
Peace.
Radio Okitalk.